We're joined in studio by Zack Gold, visiting fellow at the INSS. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
And who specializes in Egypt and the Sinai Peninsula. But first, let's take a look at the following report that has the details on yesterday's developments.
January 25th, the anniversary of the popular Egyptian uprising that led to the removal of former President Hosni Mubarak from power, a monumental event in the history of the region, and perhaps the major turning point of the Arab Spring. Throughout the day, violence broke out at different locations around the country where the anniversary was being marked, with Islamists and anti-government protesters coming out against the current regime. Egyptian security sources reported at least 15 deaths overall in the afternoon. Access to Tahrir Square, the symbolic epicenter of the 2011 protests, was cut off. 4 years after the former president's ouster, the Middle East has changed, but some are surprised at how similar today's Egypt is to that ruled by Mubarak. Others, perhaps not so much.
Demonstrations, which were not banned even under the Mubarak regime, are now banned by law. 70% of those who have been detained were detained because of this law, from all factions.
The political turmoil and violence which followed the removal of Mubarak eventually led to the rise of Egypt's current strongman, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who has cracked down on the Muslim Brotherhood and other opposition groups in a manner that has surpassed even Mubarak himself. For Sisi's supporters, stability is worth the price.
We've drawn up a constitution and we've elected a president, and the parliamentary elections are coming up. When these institutions are complete, I can say that Egypt has entered the phase of the Third Republic and that it's approaching a phase of development, reformation, enlightenment, and fixing the disorder that has happened in Egypt.
Al-Sisi himself was in Saudi Arabia over the weekend to mark the death of King Abdullah, who passed away early Friday. The Saudi monarch was himself a reformist who challenged extremist religious authorities in his own country. Some see parallels with the current Egyptian leader.
أمام رجال وعلماء الدين أنت مش ممكن تكون وأنت جواه حاسس بيه مش ممكن وأنت جواه تكون حاسس بيه لازم تخرج منه وتتفرج عليه وتقراه بفكر مستنير حقيقي ده أنت محتاجين تتوقفوا بشدة وأنا بقول تاني إحنا محتاجين ثورة دينية.
For now, it appears that the current regime in Egypt has managed to consolidate itself in the face of threats from within. There is no doubt, however, that tensions continue to bubble beneath the surface.
Looking at Egypt, and I think one of the birthplaces, granted Tunisia, but one of the birthplaces of the Arab Spring was Tahrir Square. It was the moment where, the world was holding its breath because this great, not democracy, but this great change came about that people brought it. 4 years later, we're looking actually at Sisi, who is, just another Mubarak. How did that happen?
Sure. Well, one of the things we need to keep in mind to build on Jacob's report, additionally, is that January 25th is Police Day, a day to commemorate the great work of the Egyptian police. And because of the brutality, because of the way that Egyptian police were able to get away with anything during Mubarak's day, that was part of the reason for the uprising, in addition to bread. Of course, the claim for uprising, the moniker was bread, freedom, social justice. Today, we see a very different situation where those popular protesters, like the leftists, like the Brotherhood, still say bread, freedom, social justice. But most of the Egyptian population, if they didn't always say this, now say bread, stability, security. And that's really what we're seeing, that the current government, led by Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, has been given a lot of free rein to do what is necessary to get the economy back on track. And the local population knows that to get the economy back on track, you need security, you need stability in the streets. So they're willing to accept, for a time being, this amount of frankly, brutality in order to get protesters off the streets, because the protesters block business from happening, block investment.
No, but is Sisi in control of the entire state?
No, he's clearly not. But there are a number of different factors within the state itself. People talk about a deep state or a pharaoh at the top. Sisi is not all-powerful, and the government is not all-powerful. More importantly, it's a very, as Jacob said, it's a very large country with a very large bureaucracy. If a police commander or the interior minister gives an order from Cairo, that's not necessarily going to be carried out at every level. And so there's not certainly a command of, if I as a police officer act against orders, I will be held responsible. In fact, we've seen, generally speaking, impunity in police cases. There was recently a case where there are two police officers who were offered bail after evidence suggests that they raped a female detainee.
Right.
So there is a sense in Egypt, on the Egyptian street, that the police impunity that existed prior to 2011 still exists today. And now I agree with Jacob that the view of the army and the view of the police is different. And one of the things that we saw in February 2011 really, was the army came out to the streets in a way protecting the population from the brutality of the police. And this was a great step for the army. It was a very shrewd move, and the army helped at the time decapitate the state, removing Mubarak. They did the same thing when Mohamed Morsi was out of control. I think this is an interesting thing we see is everyone at the top of Egypt, whether it was Mubarak or whether it was Morsi or whether it's Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, they have a sense of authority that we don't associate with in the West.
No, completely. We don't associate. We will never understand. It's actually a very valid point. I mean, and I think that's one of the problems that the West has with the Middle East. But I want to go back to the point of when it comes to Sisi and the Muslim Brotherhood. You know, what we're seeing around the world is actually the constant use of, you know, this power is needed within Egypt because we need to root out the Brotherhood. But, you know, Sisi's crackdown has neutralized the Brotherhood but failed to end an Islamic insurgency in the Sinai, right? I mean, that's the place where it's not successful enough. And is that being used as capital to use more force within Egypt is my question to you.
That's a good question. First of all, the two are not related. It's not a Brotherhood insurgency in the Sinai.
Is there even anybody left from the Brotherhood? Aren't they all in jail?
Many activists in jail, and this is the interesting thing. We have seen that since Abdel Fattah al-Sisi became president, and especially since following the overthrow of Morsi, the crackdown on the Brotherhood generally, the Brotherhood is unable to organize mass protests anymore. They do protest every week. They get tens of people out. For a movement as allegedly large as the Brotherhood is, to get 50 people out into a neighborhood of Cairo is not a large protest. And they're just not able to mobilize in the same way. But what we are seeing is that likely Brotherhood supporters, there's no, there isn't a lot of direct evidence, but there's a lot of suggestion that Brotherhood supporters are involved in sabotage campaigns. There have been an increasing amount since the fall of attacks on train lines, on buses, you know, on transportation infrastructure. And since Morsi's overthrow, there have been a number of attacks on pylons, on electrical towers, in order to create blackouts. In fact, yesterday, two terrorists were killed when their bomb, two of the casualties of the day they were attempting to bomb a electrical tower, and this has been an ongoing thing. So even though they can't come out in street protests anymore, they still are able to disrupt the country. And this is a deliberate campaign by the anti-coup movement to destabilize Egypt, to show that Egypt is not moving forward, to scare away investors. And it'll be interesting to see if it will work in the long term.
And Zack Gold, also from the INSS, thank you very much for being with us today as we move on.
Absolutely.